Something strange is happening around Eala in America, and it is not simply that she is winning. Not long ago, many casual tennis fans in the United States could watch an entire tournament without hearing her name. Now that is becoming much harder. Philippine flags appear in the stands. Fans wait near the court hoping for an autograph. Phones rise when she walks toward the baseline. Important points suddenly feel louder. Then look across the net. Naomi Osaka could not stop her, Jessica Pegula could not stop her, and Eala was no longer being introduced as only a talented young player from the Philippines. She was becoming a problem for players the tennis world already knew. But at exactly the same time, something else was growing. The excitement became louder. The support became bigger. And so did the skepticism. Some people started asking whether the hype had gone too far. Some became irritated by the attention around her. Others seemed ready to criticize her before she had done anything especially controversial. So, here is the real question. Why would a young player who appears quiet, controlled, and focused create this much reaction? Is the backlash really about Eala? Or is it about everything growing around her? The victories, the expectations, the national pride, the fan base, the comparisons, the attention, because when a player becomes famous quickly, people stop reacting only to the tennis. They start reacting to what that player represents. And Eala has now entered that stage. To understand why, we have to go back. Washington did not create Eala. Washington revealed what had been building for years. Eala was never given the easiest road toward the top of professional tennis. The Philippines has enormous sporting passion. It has millions of fans. It has athletes capable of becoming national icons. But professional women tennis has traditionally been dominated by countries with established pathways: the United States, Spain, Russia, the Czech Republic. Countries where young players could look at previous champions and see a road that had already been traveled. Eala did not have that same history behind her. That made every early milestone feel larger. She was not simply trying to climb a ranking. She was trying to reach a level no Filipino singles player had reached before. Then came a major sign. In 2022, Eala won the girls' singles title at the U.S. Open. For a young Filipino player, winning in New York meant more than another junior trophy. It happened at one of the biggest tournaments in the sport. For Filipino fans, it looked like a glimpse of something new, a possible future star. But junior tennis can only tell the world that a player has talent. Professional tennis asks a colder question. Can you survive? That is where the difficult part began. Professional opponents were stronger. They were more experienced. They knew how to expose weaknesses. They knew how to turn one loose service game into an entire lost set. They knew how to make a young player uncomfortable. There was no automatic path from junior champion to WTA star. So, Eala went through the part that rarely becomes a viral video. ITF tournaments, qualifying rounds, early exits, small ranking gains, weeks when almost nobody outside her most dedicated supporters was talking about her. That period matters, because later it became easy to look at the famous victories and imagine that Eala suddenly arrived. She did not. She was building. Training at the Rafa Nadal Academy in Spain gave her access to an elite environment, but an academy cannot win matches. A famous training base cannot protect a player when she is down a break. It cannot return serve. It cannot control nerves. Once the match begins, reputation becomes irrelevant. Eala still had to learn how professional tennis works. And she had to do it while carrying something most young players never experience at the same scale: national expectation. Every milestone became news in the Philippines. Every major victory created another wave of excitement. Every setback created another question. How far can she really go? How quickly should she improve? Can she become a top 50 player? Can she threaten the best players in the world? Those questions became louder because tennis development is rarely smooth. One week a player looks ready for the next level. The next week she can disappear in qualifying. A player can improve while the ranking barely moves. She can become stronger while the public sees only another loss. For a while, Eala was still searching for enough proof to change the way the wider tennis world viewed her. But underneath the results, something important was happening. She was becoming more comfortable with the speed of higher-level opponents. She was learning how quickly momentum can change. She was accumulating experience under pressure. That experience did not always create headlines, but it created a player who could stay inside difficult matches. Eventually, that became impossible to ignore. There is a moment in the development of almost every serious player when the question changes. At first, people ask this: can she compete at this level? Later, they ask something different: can she win here? Those questions sound similar. They are not. Plenty of talented players can make elite opponents uncomfortable for an afternoon. Fewer can finish the match. Fewer can repeat it. And even fewer can do it once the opponent already knows how dangerous they are. That was the line Eala was approaching. The talent had been visible for years. The experience was growing. The belief was growing. The support around her was already enormous. But professional tennis does not reward potential forever. Eventually, everything has to become victories. One important win can always be explained away. Maybe the favorite had a bad day. Maybe the underdog played the match of her life. Maybe the conditions were perfect. Tennis produces surprises every season. Repeated victories create a different problem. At some point, luck stops being a convincing explanation. The player has changed. Eala was no longer entering important matches simply hoping to survive. She was beginning to look like someone who expected to have a chance. You can see that difference when pressure arrives. A young player who feels she does not belong often speeds up. She forces shots. She becomes impatient. She tries to escape the pressure. A player who believes she belongs reacts differently. She stays. She accepts the uncomfortable moment. She waits for another chance. That ability would become one of the most important parts of the Washington story. But there was another change. Eala was losing anonymity. And losing anonymity changes everything. When an unknown player meets a famous opponent, she often has one hidden advantage: surprise. The opponent may know her ranking. The opponent may know a few results, but she may not fully understand the patterns yet. Once the upsets begin, that disappears. Coaches start watching, opponents start studying. Scouting becomes more detailed. The elite begins preparing for you. That is respect in its least glamorous form. And it creates a new challenge. Can you still win when nobody is surprised anymore? Washington would provide a huge answer. Then Washington happened. This was the tournament where the old explanation stopped working. Eala was no longer only producing interesting moments. She was surviving entire matches against established players. Then Naomi Osaka stood across the net. Osaka was not simply another opponent. She was a multiple Grand Slam champion. A former world number one of the most recognizable tennis players of her generation. For many casual fans in America, Osaka needed no introduction. Eala still did. Then Eala beat her. That result immediately created attention, but the most important part came next. Because after a major upset, the following match can reveal more than the upset itself. Before the surprise, a young player can swing freely. Nobody expects her to win. The pressure belongs to the favorite. After the surprise, everything changes. Now the crowd expects something. The media expects something. The next opponent has information. The emotional high becomes another challenge. This is where many great tournament stories end. The underdog gets one unforgettable victory. Then reality returns. Eala kept moving. And eventually Jessica Pegula was waiting in the final. The atmosphere changed again. Pegula was not only an elite player. She was one of the most recognizable American players competing on American soil. Now, Eala was not trying to create another interesting upset. She was trying to finish the tournament. Pegula won the first set, 6-4. That was the moment where the story could have ended comfortably. Eala had already done enough to call Washington a breakthrough. She had already beaten famous opponents. She had already created headlines. She had already shown the tennis world that she was dangerous. Losing the final would not have erased any of that. And that is exactly why the next part mattered. Eala stayed inside the match. She took the second set, 6-4. Now, one set remained. The pressure was no longer theoretical. A title was directly in front of her. Then came the score that changed the entire feeling of the tournament. 6-0. Eala took the deciding set against Pegula without losing a game. That was the moment the conversation changed. Before Washington, people could ask whether her best tennis might trouble elite opponents. After Washington, there was evidence that her best tennis could beat them. And not only once. She had handled different opponents. Different pressure, different expectations. She had lost the opening set of the final and recovered. Then, when momentum moved toward her, she did not simply survive. She took control. That does not mean she became unbeatable. It does not guarantee Grand Slam trophies. It does not mean every weakness disappeared. It means something more realistic and more important. Her ceiling became impossible to dismiss. For years, the public had been waiting for proof. Washington provided it. And once that happened, another transformation began immediately. People who clicked because they recognized Osaka started learning Eala. People who knew Pegula started learning Eala. People who had never followed Philippine tennis started noticing Philippine flags in the stands. The famous opponent became the doorway. The upset created curiosity. The next victory created belief. Then the audience started arriving for Alex Eala herself. That is when the Eala effect became much bigger than one trophy. Look into the stands when Eala plays in North America. The support is difficult to miss. Philippine flags. Groups of fans waiting for her. Crowds reacting to important points as if the match carries something larger than rankings. For many supporters, it does. Eala is not simply another player from their country. She represents something Philippine tennis has rarely experienced at this level. A Filipina singles player standing across the net from globally recognized stars and winning. That distinction matters. It turns ordinary support into emotional investment, and America is an especially important place for this effect. The United States has a large Filipino-American community. It also hosts some of the biggest tournaments in professional tennis. Put those things together with a player who is suddenly defeating famous champions, and a match thousands of miles from Manila can start feeling close to home. That is powerful. Not because cheering automatically wins matches. It does not. But sports stars are created through more than rankings. Rankings show results. Crowds show meaning. And Eala is beginning to generate both. This is also why her rise can attract people who were never serious tennis fans before. Some viewers are not beginning with tennis. They are beginning with Eala. They watch because she is Filipino. Then they learn the opponent. They learn why Osaka matters. They learn why Pegula matters. They learn what the rankings mean. They learn why one tournament can change a career. Eala becomes the doorway into tennis. That is how a player can become more important to a sport than one position on a ranking list. But the same cycle that creates passionate support can also create resistance. And this is where the story becomes more complicated. The strange thing about the backlash around a rising athlete is that it does not always begin with the athlete. Sometimes it begins with the attention around the athlete. The cycle can move very quickly. Eala wins. Fans celebrate, more clips spread, more people talk about her. Expectations rise, comparisons appear. Then someone looks at all that excitement and asks a different question. Is she really that good? Now people are no longer responding only to Alex Eala. They are responding to Alex Eala plus the hype surrounding her. Those are two different things. A person can respect Eala and still believe expectations are becoming unrealistic. A person can enjoy her tennis and still become irritated by exaggerated comparisons. A fan of another player can watch Eala defeat a favorite and naturally feel frustrated. A passionate supporter can interpret normal criticism as disrespect. Then another supporter responds. The argument grows. And suddenly, the discussion is no longer about a forehand or a serve. It becomes emotional. Is Eala overrated? Is she underrated? Are her fans too aggressive? Are critics refusing to respect her? Is the media pushing her too quickly? Does every victory need to become a historic event? Does every loss prove the hype was wrong? None of those arguments require Eala herself to create controversy. Success can create controversy around her. That is the first force behind the backlash. Hype creates resistance. The second force is the fan base. When a player has a small group of supporters, nobody cares much about the behavior of individual fans. When the fan base becomes huge and visible, everything changes. Imagine 10,000 fans behaving normally. They cheer, they watch, they celebrate, they go home. Nothing about that becomes controversial. Now imagine one person posts something extreme. Alex is already better than every player in the top 10. That comment gets responses. Someone laughs at it. Another fan gets angry. Another critic attacks the supporters. Now dozens of people are fighting under one post. Which part gets noticed? Not the 10,000 normal fans. The fight. That is how a minority can begin representing a majority in the minds of people watching from outside. Then the cycle starts feeding itself. Critics say the fans are unbearable. Normal supporters feel attacked. They defend the community. Critics interpret that defense as more evidence. More arguments begin. Soon, a debate created by a tiny number of extreme voices becomes attached to the entire Eala effect. That is not really a problem created by Alex Eala. It is an amplification problem, and national pride makes the cycle even stronger. Her victories can feel deeply personal to Filipino supporters. Criticism can therefore feel personal too. A normal tennis debate can suddenly become a debate about respect. Once identity enters the conversation, the temperature rises quickly. There is a third force. Winning changes who loses. When Eala was an unknown young player trying to climb the rankings, she was easy to support. She was the underdog. She represented possibility. She was not threatening the players most fans already loved. Then she started beating them. Beat Osaka, and some Osaka fans experienced the story from the opposite side. Beat Pegula in America, and some American fans experienced the celebration as the defeat of their player. The better Eala becomes, the more often this will happen. Every successful underdog eventually crosses this line. At first, everyone loves the story. Then the underdog starts taking something. Ranking points. Trophies. Attention, tournament positions. Victories over popular players. Now she is no longer harmless. She is competition. And competition creates stronger emotions than potential ever could. Unknown players are mostly ignored. Promising players receive encouragement. Dangerous players receive preparation. Stars receive both love and criticism. Eala is moving through those stages now. There is one more mechanism worth watching. Manufactured controversy. Once the name of an athlete becomes valuable enough, people can generate clicks by attaching drama to that name. A shocking claim appears. A famous person is supposedly criticizing the player. Fans become angry. People share it. Others react before checking. Then the claim turns out to be misleading, exaggerated, or unsupported. But by then, the emotional damage has already happened. The athlete may have said nothing. The athlete may have done nothing. Yet thousands of people can still argue around her name. That is why the Eala effect can sometimes look more toxic than the person at the center of it. The louder the ecosystem becomes, the less control Eala has over how her name is used. But there is an important distinction. Criticism of the hype is not automatically hatred of Alex Eala. Skepticism about her future is not automatically disrespect. And passionate support does not mean every prediction about her will become true. Those distinctions matter. Because once they disappear, every result becomes a battle between extreme positions. If Eala wins, one side says this proves she is destined for greatness. If she loses, another side says this proves she was always overrated. Neither reaction explains how professional tennis actually works. Development is not that simple. A player can be exceptional and still lose badly. A player can produce a huge tournament and struggle the next week. A player can have a very high ceiling while still developing the consistency required to reach it regularly. Toronto became the perfect reality check. After a breakthrough tournament, one question always arrives. Can you do it again? Washington created enormous excitement. Toronto offered a different challenge. Eala was no longer arriving as an anonymous young player. People were watching. Opponents knew what had happened. Expectations were higher. She beat Alicia Parks. Then she beat Katie McNally. Those victories did not have the headline power of Osaka or Pegula. But they mattered. They showed that the Washington run did not disappear immediately after the trophy ceremony. Then came Belinda Bencic. And Eala lost. 4-6, 0-6. That second set was a reminder of how unforgiving professional tennis remains. The tour does not care about the previous headline. It does not care how loud the crowd was last week. It does not care how many people discovered your name. Every tournament resets the problem. This is exactly where the debate around Eala can become distorted. People who believe too strongly in the hype can treat a loss like a disaster. People who dislike the hype can treat the same loss like proof that the entire breakthrough was meaningless. Both reactions miss the point. Washington and Toronto can be true at the same time. Washington showed how high Eala can play. Toronto showed how difficult it is to live at that level every week. That is not contradiction. That is professional tennis. The next stage of her career is no longer about proving that she can create a major upset. She has already done that. It is about making elite-level tennis repeatable. That is much harder. And it becomes even harder after a breakthrough because the surprise disappears. Opponents will increasingly prepare for Eala specifically. They will study her patterns. They will identify preferred combinations. They will examine where she becomes uncomfortable. They will test what happens when she is rushed. They will change rally shapes. They will look for moments where confidence becomes vulnerable. That is one of the greatest compliments the tour can give a player. When opponents build plans specifically for you, you matter. But it also means the next step requires evolution. The game that created the breakthrough cannot remain frozen. Eala will have to adjust as opponents adjust. Then they will adjust again. That is the endless cycle at the top of professional tennis. Washington was not proof that she will dominate the tour. Toronto was not proof that Washington was a fluke. Together, they reveal the real challenge. Turning extraordinary into normal. And this is where the biggest long-term danger may not even be the haters. It may be overexposure. If every victory becomes historic, the word historic loses power. If every tournament becomes proof that Eala is destined for greatness, ordinary development starts looking like failure. If every criticism becomes hate, legitimate discussion becomes impossible. And if neutral fans feel that Eala is being pushed into every conversation before the results naturally demand it, resistance can begin before they ever develop a problem with Eala herself. That is the paradox. Sometimes the best way to protect a rising star is not to make the hype louder. It is to let the tennis speak. Let the wins build the story. Let the ranking create the pressure. Let the opponents show how seriously they take her. Sustainable respect is stronger than forced attention. So why is Eala suddenly creating such strong reactions? The answer is not one thing. It is the collision of several forces happening at once. She is winning bigger matches. Her fan base is becoming more visible.